So this is the Financial Times of yesterday, Wednesday, the 9th of September 2020. And it is very clear. And the headline is very clear. So it's an open admission that Johnson is breaking the international law, which is the main theme that in this world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, we have been featuring for the last at least 6 weeks. And we've been doing this concerning various utterances and statements made by Boris Johnson. And we shall show how the Daily Express, Beaverbrook's contaminating legacy, is the only Fleet Street paper today brazenly still defying all evidence and saying that Boris Johnson is right. And we have been saying that Boris Johnson has been flouting international conventions, international treaties, international declarations, and other obligations directly linked with the UK's standing or status as an active signatory to all these treaties, agreements, declarations, conventions, and charters. So charters, conventions, agreements, declarations, and all of these are being denied, set aside by Boris Johnson. So there is no international treaty, international law, international legal obligation. And that's what the entirety of the Fleet Street papers is having to agree is happening, except Beaver Group's poisonous Daily Express. So we will come to that in a second. And today's Financial Times, Thursday, the 10th of September 2020, its price in Ireland is £3.20, price in Channel Islands, £3.20, and in the UK is £2.90. That's very important to point out, the price and the price differences, the Financial Times. Now, in the East End of London, £2.90 is the equivalent of 4 separate so-called newspapers, if they are accepted as newspapers, published in the name of the Bangladeshi community from addresses in Tower Hamlets. So each one is supposedly, the last time I checked, costs 50 pence. And all of these put together, that would be like six of them, just 10 pence short of the price of 6 of these so-called papers. And anyone who is watching this, whenever they're watching, this is where I'm putting the cursor. Now that picture is that of Lutfur Rahman, and it has been montaged with the various updated commentaries yesterday that I added, and I shall put that in a bigger now. This is the film. This is the film of the actual event on the 29th of October 2010, which is literally within the last 10 days of October 2010, when the infamous, the notorious so-called election to the executive mayor corrupt post was staged in Tower Hamlets for the first time. And Lutfur Rahman was declared to have been the newly, quote, elected person in that post. Now, this is the scene from the end of the Fournier Street connecting to Brick Lane and looking towards the rest of Brick Lane northwards. And this is just on the left here, just there, just somewhere there, is the entrance to the Brick Lane Mosque. That's the entrance to the Brick Lane Mosque. And these are people passing. And here are some people picking up here the papers. This is the papers that I talked about, the Bangla language, so-called newspapers, published weekly from addresses in Tower Hamlets and costing, if they were paid for, 50 pence. Now these are the collections. These papers are the collections. They're shown here. I pictured them just outside the Brick Lane Mosque entrance. And we shall come to the entrance a little bit later in this particular segment. Now, what is happening here is that these papers were left there, and that this person is seen clutching one as they move away from that. And what the musallis, the plural of these prayer goers, the musallis were expected to be picking up these papers. Now, that was the time, that was the week, that the first week since the so-called election. So it didn't have yet the feel of the euphoria that in the periods after that election dominated the contents and the displays on the so-called newspapers, called the Bengali newspapers, but they were not newspapers at all. They never were. And we shall go into the depth of the depravity and the emptiness and the corruption of the contents of these so-called newspapers in due course, because the community addressed and targeted by these papers, of course, is the Bangladeshis. And the Bangladeshis are among the most deprived of the deprived in the deprived bara, generally. And it's not only deprivation materially, it's a consequent and attendant and concomitant deprivation of the soul, a moral deprivation. And that is why I have praised on the strict evidence the degradation and the degeneration and the depravity created by these so-called newspapers. They're supposed to be enlightening the community, but they're not. Most of those papers are now no longer in being. Only a few, but most of them have disappeared. And it's not unconnected with the fact the Tower Hamlets Council was used or abused by the regime that was fronted by Lutfur Rahman, which paid bribe money to a number of these and outlets, corresponding outlets, so-called satellite outlets, called the Bengali European Operations Television Satellite Channels. And it has to be said that one of the highest amounts paid to anyone related or linked to the so-called Bengali ethnic media, so-called outlets, by the Lutfur Rahman regime was, of course, what is called Channel S. And we have discussed this before, but we shall discuss further in due course later. But that is the channel whose so-called chief reporter was also working at the same time as an advisor to Lutfur Rahman. And it has been variously reported that he was paid several £100,000. So we shall link that payment with the payment of the similar